Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of America's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Ed Denzel. Hope everybody had a great start to the week. I'm glad to see that my Pirates are winning some games. Took 2 out of 3 in L.A. this weekend, and then last night won. They beat the San Francisco Giants. They're going to have to continue to do more of that if they want to make the wild card game. Do I think they're going to make it? They have a better chance now than they did a few weeks ago. Their pitching's going to need to continue to keep the other team to about 2 or 3 or 4 runs. If it gets more than that, I don't think the Pirates are going to be able to generate enough offense, but it's going to be interesting. Now, if they lose like 4 or 5 in a row, then their wild card chances, I think, will be dead. And they have some important games coming up against the Marlins and others. So we'll just have to see. I'll continue to listen to them and watch them as long as I think that they have a wild card chance. But once I think their wild card chance is done, I'll probably find other things to do and probably get interested in the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, of course, we know football is going to be starting here in a few weeks. I can also continue to line up some really good cases for my other show that's going to be starting in a few weeks. My other show called Unfound, which deals with people who have disappeared. And I appreciate these people who I've had the opportunity to talk to over the last month. These are people who are not easy to get a hold of. I'm sure they get a lot of media requests. They do a lot of interviews, and they can afford to be selective in who they talk to. And that some of these people have given me their time and have agreed to at some point do an interview for my show. I can't thank them enough. It's interesting for me to talk to them. I hope to publicize their cases on the show and give these cases the attention that they deserve, and maybe we'll, maybe get lucky. Do I have to put it that way? Get lucky and solve a couple of these cases before it's all over. And I'll continue to work on getting more interviews for these shows. And like I said, the show's called Unfound, going to be starting hopefully within the next couple weeks. Let's get to the show. A topic that it seems like it popped up while I was back in Pennsylvania for 2 weeks was this idea that the GOP will throw out Donald Trump at some point if things continue to go the way they are. Now, this isn't a new topic to this show. And the reason it's not a new topic to this show is because my belief is that the opportunity to rid themselves of Donald Trump occurred during the convention, which seems like it was yesterday, but now it was, a month ago or something like that. That was the opportunity. And I had made the comment going back several months is that Donald Trump is just going to get crazier and crazier. He's going to make more outrageous statements, and his lackeys are going to make even more outrageous statements as it continues. Once there is no Republican, contender, somebody that could beat him for the nomination, he's just left to his own devices. And I think that's why his campaign, once again, has gotten wackier and wackier as the weeks go on. And there seems to be a lot of hubbub more and more recently that, yes, this actually could happen. And I'll get into a little bit about this guy who's come out of nowhere, this Evan McMullin guy I'd never even heard of, to be honest with you, until recently, until he said that he's going to run as an independent, as a conservative independent. The reason that the GOP is not going to get rid, I should put it this way. I asked this friend of mine who I talk politics with, would the GOP ever really ditch Donald Trump? Now, would they ditch the whole thing? Would they ditch Donald Trump and Mike Pence together? I guess that's a little bit of a different question. But I asked this friend of mine a long time ago, and he's under the belief that the GOP would not do that. There'd be a lot of fallout from doing something like that. And I kind of agree with that, but there is a part of me that thinks that is this the hill on which the GOP wants to die? Remember, I'm not a part of the Republican Party anymore. I have to talk about them in the third person. And the way I see it, these stories about them kicking him out or him having no discipline, and they've threatened if he doesn't get his act together, his campaign together, that they're going to stop funding him. And this is kind of funny because I actually had some Trump person on Twitter yesterday try to tell me that the only reason that the GOP has been able to raise as much money as it has is because Donald Trump. With any of the other candidates, it would have raised a lot less. That's Trump world. That's Trump world. I don't think there are any facts to back that statement up. In fact, I think that there's enough evidence to the opposite. That had it been somebody else, and it wouldn't even have to have been Ted Cruz. It could have been John Case. It could have been Jeb Bush, somebody else, that more money would have been raised. I don't think there's any question about that. But at this point, I just cannot see the GOP. I think that this is fantasy land, and I think that it's a little bit of an embarrassment that some good conservative websites have spent so much time talking about this. At this point, once again, at this point, and we're halfway through August. The election is less than 3 months away. It's more like 2.5 months away. And the closer you get to the election, the less likely it is that the GOP is going to dump Donald Trump. In fact, I would say that it's more likely as we get closer and closer to the election, if Donald Trump thinks that he is going to lose and get trounced, it's more than likely to me that he would drop out instead of the GOP kicking him out. That's my world. I think that's what I know about Donald Trump. I think that's what I know about politics, what I think I know about the Republican Party. The other tough part that a lot of these dump Trump stories tend to forget is that, yes, in most polls, Donald Trump is losing. It's a variety of losing, from a few points to 10 points. Some battleground states, he's losing by a little, he's losing by a lot, he's ahead here, he's behind there. But as long as there are enough polls that show him close, and not just nationally, but in these important states, the GOP cannot dump him, cannot kick him out, ask him to leave, make him disappear, whatever the case may be. As long as there are enough polls that show within 5 or 6 points, something like that, it makes no sense for them to do that. My only question is, what happens if a month from now we're talking about a consistent 10-point deficit? Nationally, and then in Florida where I live, or in Ohio, in Virginia, some of these other important states, that he's continually 7-8 points behind. Then what? How bad does it have to get before the GOP would say, and that's the problem. The time is not on the Republican side. Time is not on Donald Trump's side. Time is definitely on Hillary Clinton's side. This is kind of like a football game where if you're the team that's behind, like say by a touchdown, the biggest enemy you have in the first 3 quarters is the other team. It's just a matter of, well, we have to stop them on defense, and then we have to get a touchdown, kick the extra point to get this thing tied up. For 3 quarters, you're fighting the other team, but it gets to that last quarter. At some point, the opposition is not the other team in different colored uniforms. It's the clock. That's what makes football, I guess, so interesting. It's not just the dynamic plays and everything, but how a game can change because of the time element. As you get closer, you get into the fourth quarter, to 10 minutes, to 7 minutes, to 5 minutes, and one of the teams is getting very desperate. And just like in football, in politics, it's hard to fight the clock. You can't defeat the clock. Zeros are going to appear up on the scoreboard one way or the other. Just like in elections, at some point sooner or later, it's going to be election day. It's going to be the first Tuesday in November, and there's nothing you can do to stop that. Donald Trump can't stop that. And for all you conspiracy theorists, Barack Obama isn't going to stop that either in an effort to get a third term. Those stories continue to be out there. Once again, it's getting a little late for that, don't you think? And so the GOP, like a losing football team, has to be thinking, we're running out of time. It's not so much the opposition is Hillary Clinton. The enemy is that they have a candidate who was, for all intents and purposes, legally nominated by, unfortunately, a minority of Republicans, and if you are to believe the stories, by a lot of Democrats who crossed over and voted for Donald Trump. And the Republican Party is stuck with him. Almost. Just about stuck with him. And there's not much they can do about it. So I tried to urge you that for all you Never Trump people who listen to this show, and I'm, of course, a Never Trump person, I don't want you to get too excited about this. We're getting to the point where them dumping Trump is probably going to be worse for the party than just living with him through the first Tuesday in November. That's just the way. We all knew this was coming. This is, the feeling I have in talking about this is no different than I had when he kept racking up those wins back in February into March. There were a lot of us, I don't know if it was me, but there were a lot of people saying this surely can't happen. This surely can't happen that Donald Trump gets this nomination. And everybody starts doing these calculations about how many delegates he needs. Well, if this happens and that happens, we can stop this. This surely can't go the way it's going to go. And then what you find out is, yes, things can go this direction. There is not some, if you want to talk about it in this way, God or something that is trying to direct us in the morally correct direction. All of everything that you see right now is all based on people's decisions going and voting between January and essentially April when he wrapped up getting enough delegates, and then, of course, later when the convention happened. This is no different, and this is not a new analogy, but like the Titanic. Once the ship hit the iceberg, it was going to sink. Just because it didn't sink in a minute didn't mean it wasn't going to sink. It just took some time. And on a side note, you can actually go on YouTube, and there is an animation of the sinking of the Titanic. It's 2 hours, however long, from when the ship hits the iceberg until all of it vanishes below the surface of the water. It's pretty weird to watch. I haven't watched the whole thing. I've just kind of clicked through it just to see, yeah, man, it is over 2 hours of this animation. Really, really strange. But just because something doesn't happen right away doesn't mean it's not going to happen. This is kind of like that. We've hit the iceberg. The Republican Party is slowly sinking, hasn't sunk yet, and there aren't enough lifeboats to go around. At some point, November is going to happen. That'll be the day when the ship sinks below the waves. The SS Trump sinks below the waves, and possibly the Republican Party with it. And I just don't see any realistic out at this time, escape from it. There was a time where they could have done something. They chose not to. They chose to embrace Donald Trump. That's a mistake. The people who run the party and the delegates and the people who run the convention, they made a decision, and they're going to have to live with it. I've told you through all of this, I'll be fine one way or the other. I'll be fine. I'll live. Well, Hillary Clinton's going to... I'll live. It sucks. But either way, it sucks for me. I don't see that big of a difference between them. So for me, it's going to suck one way or the other, and I don't want to hear about judges or anything. Yes, I know he picks the best people. That's why he gets Katrina Pearson out there saying that it was Barack Obama who got us involved in Afghanistan. Then she has to say, well, no, I meant Syria. It was the thing in my ear, the microphone in my ear kind of messed me up. Okay. Yeah, he hires the best people. Mm-hmm. And as I made the point before, that suddenly all these people who couldn't name one Supreme Court justice, they're all worried about the Supreme Court. That's holding on to the thinnest of threads to save yourself. That's like being on the Titanic and thinking, I got this deck chair and it's wooden. Maybe when the ship goes down, I can lay on this thing and it'll save me. Well, if it was that easy, a bunch more people would have survived the sinking of the Titanic. That didn't happen. So this is the way it's going to go. Once again, unless the poll numbers get to the point where the Republican Party is really going to lose a lot of face, is going to just completely embarrass itself. But if it thinks that, and of course, if they try to kick Trump out, he's not going to quit quietly. If he's going to leave and stop campaigning, it's going to be because he chooses to do so, not because they say that he can't represent the Republican Party anymore. And we know if he drops out, then all those Trump cultists, they're going to go too, and it could become even worse. Now, for me, a guy who tries to make decisions based on principle, I don't mind losing. And that's what we as conservatives, we have to hang on to through all of this. Is that, yes, we realize that our ideas aren't going to win all the time. But what's important is that we stick to those principles, those values, even if they are going to lose once in a while. What the Republican Party has done is that it has walked away from some of the things that have made it successful the last 30, 40 years in an effort to win. And it's costing them. It really is. All because they want to make sure that Hillary Clinton doesn't win. Well, the way to beat Hillary Clinton was to elect somebody who at least was more principled. I'm not even saying it had to be the person had to be as conservative as I am. but somebody who surely wasn't a Hillary Clinton supporter for the last 25 years. Surely that should have been one of the criteria. It wasn't. It wasn't. So, in a way, the way I look at it is, you know what? The Republican Party deserves to lose. I don't like it. It's going to make things very, very difficult. But when you make bad decisions, penalties should be incurred. That's the only way that you can be a good parent. That's the only way that you can be a good employee. That's the only way that you can be a good friend, is when people make bad choices, there has to be a penalty. This is going to be the Republicans' penalty. They're just going to have to live with it. Now, could Trump win? Obviously, the Republican Party is not going to drop Donald Trump if there are signs that he could win. What I see in Trump land is very much the same of what I saw back in 2012. People trying to manipulate the polls in their own heads, thinking this surely can't happen. Barack Obama, as bad as he is, surely can't win again. Well, he did. He did. Remember unskewedpolls.com? Remember that? That's kind of what it feels like now, with Trump supporters trying to twist it this way. No, I'm not going to stand here and tell you every poll is genuine or gets the demographics right or anything like that. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that. But I think enough of them are. So don't believe, just to sum this up, don't believe that the Republican Party is going to drop Donald Trump. You have to realize, the longer he stays as the nominee for the Republicans every day, the longer he's going to be the nominee for the Republicans. I mean, if he isn't dropped today, then that means he's going to be in a few days longer. If he's not dropped tomorrow, that means he's going to be even in longer than that. And at some point, just get to the point of inevitability where, yep, they're going to ride him out till November. Once again, unless it just becomes so embarrassing for them. But I would have been embarrassed a long time ago. They obviously don't have a sense of modesty that I do, I guess. But let's move on to something else, and this is kind of a tangential topic to that, and that is Evan McMillan, who came out of nowhere to declare that he wants to run for president. I think that he has gotten on the ballot in Utah, and you know that I'm a big fan of National Review. I've stuck with them through some tough times. I was critical of them back in 2012, where I thought that they came out supporting Mitt Romney a little too early in the nomination process. And, of course, Mitt Romney, not on top of everything else, not being that conservative. At times, flirted maybe a little too much of being a little too Ted Cruz, being a little too anti-Ted Cruz at times. But I've stuck with them back and forth. But this article that they wrote about, it wasn't they, it was one of them. I didn't write down the author's name. It wasn't Kevin Williamson or Charles C.W. Cook. It was one of the, can I say this, lesser-known writers there. It's a little bit of an embarrassing article when National Review has a piece where they're trying to figure out how Evan McMillan can actually throw the election to the House of Representatives, who surely wouldn't elect Donald Trump to be president. That is a bit of a stretch. That smells to me, I don't know if this particular writer had a deadline, couldn't think of anything else to write. I don't know. There's a lot of reasons that writers write unusual pieces, but this piece should have been below National Review's standards. Because the odds of this happening, what is detailed, have to be the same as the odds of winning Powerball. So when you put it at that kind of percentage, it's not worthy of a good magazine/website like National Review. That seems to me just like an article that's just written to take up space. And what the other thing about this particular article is, it reminded me, and I made this joke on Facebook. It was a non-political joke about a month ago. That about British announcers, in particular British soccer announcers. This must have been during the Euro 2016. I might have caught one or two games online, maybe just because. And the way the British announcers do, it's a little embarrassing. What they'll do is if somebody misses, say their team they're rooting for is losing 1-0, and the team they're rooting for comes down and misses a kick, has an open, easy kick into the goal that could tie the game up, and the player misses it, just bombs it over the goal or to the side, or it gets blocked or whatever else. The British announcer will then go into like a minute explanation of why, had that goal gone in, that it would have totally changed the tempo of the game, the direction of the game. And they'll say something like, oh, he missed that shot. Had he made that shot, Manchester United would have come back and leveled this game up, and they would have had new life and new confidence, and then this would have happened, and then they would have probably come back down and probably had another great shot on goal and could have made it 2-1, And they'll go on for like a minute of all these glorious things that were going to happen had that one shot just gone in. Well, the important point is the shot didn't go in. That's the important part. It didn't go in. So everything after that is just conjecture. It's just stuff to take up space, just like this article is. The point is about this is you can talk all you want about Evan McMillan and all these things, these domino effect that could happen. Well, the first thing is people actually have to show up and vote for him. Now, what are the odds of that happening? Your average person, now, what they say can happen, as is detailed in the article, and there's a couple other articles that have been out there about this, is that if Evan McMillan wants to just compete in Utah, for example, if he could win that state and get a couple electoral votes, but not compete in any other states, and if Trump can just do a certain level in these other states to keep Hillary Clinton from getting that 270 number, then you would have a situation where it would be 269 Hillary Clinton, 269 Donald Trump, and then those small amount of votes, electoral votes from Utah would go to Evan McMillan, and then that would send the election to the House of Representatives. That's to break it down the easiest way. Whereas they say if Evan McMillan tries to compete in some of these other states, he has the odds of hurting Donald Trump, which means Donald Trump might not win some of these other states, and essentially Evan McMillan would be helping Hillary Clinton win those states that Donald Trump usually would. So for this all to happen, Evan McMillan just has to be happy about competing in Utah and trying to win that state in particular. Now, given Utah's hatred for Donald Trump, I guess you could see a way that could happen. But I'm going to tell you right now, most Utah residents don't even know who Evan McMillan is, and they won't know who he is come November. I know he is because I'm a political junkie. A lot of you do, but I'm going to say most of you don't live in Utah. Not that Utah people are stupid, but your average person in Utah is not a political junkie. They pay attention to politics 1 hour a week. And I'm sure Evan McMullin doesn't make it into that hour. So what are the odds of them voting for him, despite, I guess he's Mormon and everything else? Not too good. Not too good. And that's what is understated in these articles. Despite Donald Trump, despite Hillary Clinton, Evan McMullin has about a .01 chance of winning Utah. There, I said it. But I got to go to the break. You've been listening to America's Conservative Podcast.
The voice of American conservatism. WRS Digital, Red State Talk Radio.
And we are back. I want to continue to talk about Evan McMullin for just a couple more minutes, and then we'll move on to something else. The attention that Evan McMullin is getting, and I want you to know for the record that I have nothing against the guy. I had never even heard of him until recently. I'm going to guess that happened sometime when I was in Pennsylvania. When did he announce that he wanted to run for president? Maybe shortly before I went to Pennsylvania, something like that. And I'm sure that he and I share a lot of the same values. I don't think I'm going to have an opportunity to vote for him if I were to think about it, depending on what goes on between now and November, simply because I don't think he's going to get on the ballot here in Florida. I'm not going to send him any money, but just only because I don't send any politicians any money. I'm not ever going to do any interviews with politicians on the show. That's not who I am. As you know, I'm going to be gearing this show toward your average conservative out there, talking to those types of people. But the article at National Review and elsewhere, it certainly does feel like a lot of desperation out there. Articles written by people who work for companies, magazines, websites that are feeling a little bit desperate and looking for any kind of hope that there is. And I have nothing against hope, but you can't have hope but then also damage your credibility at the same time. I think the responsibility that I have, that these websites have, that magazines have, is to tell the truth and to weigh the odds and the probabilities and telling your readers, your listeners, as much. And I think that when National Review, other places do this, they damage their credibility. You want to talk about Evan McMullin and talk about how he's a brave guy for doing this and how he's a good conservative and everything. But when you start calculating how he can get the presidency or do whatever else, it feels desperate. And as I have told, I've talked about the topic of desperation. I don't think that when people are desperate, they don't make good decisions. Sometimes a little fear in your life about something can bring out the best in people. No doubt about that. At crunch time, whether it's the Olympics in sports or in politics, in your love life, sometimes a little fear can be good for you. But usually when you get to the point of being desperate, usually that is something that has been going on for a long time that was bad, and you continued to ignore it and didn't do anything about it. Once again, very much like the Republican Party that should have seen this train wreck happening. I'm not going to say necessarily when the debate started, but I'd say when the nomination process started, they should have seen, this is really going to go bad for us if it goes a certain way with Donald Trump. And now they're desperate. Now some of these places are desperate. And as I have pointed out to a few friends regarding the topic of desperation, there's a reason that there is a porn site out there called DesperateAmateurs.com. It's not called non-desperateamateurs.com. It's called DesperateAmateurs.com. And what that means is these are people who are doing this because they need the money, because they're desperate for rent or whatever else. They're not doing it necessarily for the fun of it. Desperation puts people in situations where they would do and say things they normally wouldn't do. Desperation is not a good connotation, and everybody realizes that they should avoid those situations in their life, those desperate situations. Try to fix things before it gets to that point. And embracing Evan McMullin and his chances of somehow making this election go in the right direction sounds to me like desperation. I think that this is going to be something that what's going to happen in November that we're just going to have to, as conservatives, fully embrace. Doesn't mean we have to like it, but we're going to have to really continue to study why it happened and what we can do about it afterwards. And make sure that if there is going to be somebody running against the liberal in this nation, whether it's for the presidency or any other position, that we have somebody in a position who is a stark contrast to that, somebody who isn't a Democrat in Republican clothing. And that's a study that that is going to do us a lot better than continue to sit down with a calculator at 3 o'clock in the morning and figure out how Evan McMullin can fix all of this. All right, that's the point I'm trying to make. Let's go on to something else. Just to follow up, I talked to you yesterday about these two, this imam and his assistant being shot. I saw that they had, before I came on air today, I saw that they had somebody in custody, a guy that they think did the shooting. I think what screwed this guy over was that after he shot the imams and jumped back in his car, he went down the street and ended up hitting a bicyclist, and there was his car was identified, and the cops were able to put it all together that the same person who shot these two Muslims and murdered them was the same guy who ran the cyclist over, and I think that's how the cops tracked this guy down. He's not Muslim. I still stand by what I said yesterday, that when something like this happens and two Muslims get murdered, it's just as likely that some radical Muslim shot them as some non-Muslim killed them. But it seems like this is some ongoing feud between the Muslims in that community in Queens and Hispanics. I'm not sure what that's all about. I've heard some statements that say this guy who was the shooter, his last name's Morel or Morel, M-O-R-E-L. So I'm going to say Morel, not a very Hispanic last name, but I'm not sure that means anything. But he was the guy that did it, and if the police are to be believed. And I'm not sure exactly what the beef is, but some people who knew him said, yeah, he really had complaints about Muslims after 9/11. Well, I'm sure most New Yorkers did. Not to be funny about it, but I'm going to say that probably most New Yorkers still have a problem with September 11th, no matter what their political leanings are. I don't know how many of them have taken it out on Muslims in New York City, but to say that this guy, could this guy have done it because of something that's gone on in the United States, because of one of these terrorist shootings, what happened in Boston, what happened here over in Orlando, what happened over in San Bernardino? Could this particular shooter be angry about that? Could he have looked at what's going on in other places, France and elsewhere, and be frustrated and angered about what radical Muslims are doing? Sure. I'm not sure this is that. I'm not sure the shooting from a few days ago, however long ago it was, is that. Like I said, as reading the article, this seems to me to be something more involved, having to do with the neighborhood and Queens. Now, maybe there are some Muslim stuff. Maybe there's some Sharia law in there somewhere. Very possible. But I don't think that at this point that this guy shot these two because of terrorist attacks happening elsewhere in the world. All right? I just want to get that on the record. But I'll continue to follow the story, and if something pops up, I'll talk about it. Let's move on to something else. Kathleen Kane. Do any of you know who she is? She is now the former Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, the state where I grew up, lived there until I was 27 years old. And as you know, I just spent a couple weeks in Pennsylvania, and you can imagine that the news there was following her and this trial against her. She was the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, and the allegations were that, first of all, when she became Attorney General, she shut down a sting operation that was trying to catch Philadelphia politicians involved in whatever sort of dirty tricks. Now, as you would imagine, Philadelphia politicians are all Democrats, first of all. She is a Democrat. Kathleen Kane is a Democrat, and she took the place of a Republican Attorney General. The Attorney General in Pennsylvania since 1980 has been elected to office. It was a Republican. She won the election, and as soon as she got into office, she shut that down. So a little bit of political trickery going on there. Maybe she was trying to run interference, try to help out her fellow Democrat politicians in that city, and that would not be hard to believe. That alone should have caused her to be investigated and criticized. Well, there was no investigation, but she was criticized. Well, in response to this, she leaked some grand jury testimony, and she did a couple other things in trying to embarrass those people who were criticizing her for shutting this investigation down. She was trying to embarrass, kind of a power play on her part, to try to get these people who were in the Attorney General's office before her to shut up. Mm-hmm. And it has been a long and winding road for it to get from when this first happened to now, where finally yesterday she was brought to court. She pled not guilty to doing all of this. Well, a bunch of jurors in Pennsylvania decided she was guilty. They came back with a guilty verdict on all counts fairly quickly. And I'm sure she's going to appeal and all that, but the prospect that she's going to spend some time in jail. She's going to. So Attorney General of Pennsylvania is going to be in jail, and you should know that she's not the first Attorney General of Pennsylvania that has ended up in jail. There was a prior one not too long ago that also had some legal problems as well. Go figure. But I bring this up because and I don't say this because she's a Democrat. Obviously, she's an evil woman. I can tell you that there's an article that I read several months ago, and this is not the first time I talked about Kathleen Kane on this show. I talked about this when the investigation first started in all this, maybe 8 months ago, something like that, maybe longer. There's quite a lot of in-depth coverage of what went on since she became Attorney General and the allegations of what she did. Fascinating stuff. Disgusting, but fascinating. And shouldn't we, as your average citizens out there, be kind of happy about this? And I'm not saying because she's a Democrat, we as conservatives should be all excited about this, but it certainly does still prove if you have a politician who is crooked and has done things wrong, there still is the ability to have that person be brought to justice. Is it easy? No. Takes time. They're going to fight it. They know all the ins and outs and everything, especially with an attorney general. she has a lot of connections to judges and lawyers that can make a prosecution fairly complex. And there's a lot of reasons that you could have been very dismissive of this case and her getting convicted because of all of that. Well, she was. And dare I say it, I'm sure that it was not all Republicans who were on that jury or all conservatives. I'm going to say there was probably at least half the jury were Democrats, and they still found her guilty. And I thank them for doing that. So this is why once again, I don't talk about the corruption of the media that much on this show. Of course, the show has a new name now, but if you've listened to me before, you know that I don't harp on the media as much as other conservatives do, and there's other pieces of our culture I don't criticize as much. I don't criticize Hollywood as much. But this is one more reason why I don't buy into politicians are above the law. And granted, have politicians got away with quite a bit over the years? Yes. It just takes the right people to bring the right case against the right bad politician. And you can get convictions. Now, if those cases never happen, that's not the bad politician's fault. That's the prosecutor's fault. That's the law enforcement in that state or at the federal level. That's their fault, not the bad politician's fault. And Kathleen Kennedy, she's a Hollywood producer. Kathleen Kane, Attorney General of Pennsylvania, it's a somewhat powerful position. It's not governor. Is it as high as rank as senator from Pennsylvania? Probably. And here she is. She's going to be going to jail. Now, the maximum term for this, I think, was 7 years. Is she going to serve all 7 years? I don't know. Will she serve half? I don't know. But we can think about other prosecutions that have happened, not necessarily in Pennsylvania, where well-known politicians were brought to justice, and it ruined their political careers. The one that I think of, being that it happened when I lived in Nevada, was Dario Herrera, who was supposed to be, I guess you could put it this way at the time, well, in 2016 terms, you could have called him the Marco Rubio of the left. He was a Hispanic, a young, good-looking, successful Hispanic politician from Nevada. Well, he had, people were talking about, hey, he could be senator from Nevada. He could run for president. Well, then he got into some trouble, cheating on his wife, and even way worse stuff than that. And he ended up going to jail for a while. So it does happen. And that's why I would urge all of you that listen to the show, when you hear somebody saying, well, those politicians, they never go to jail. They're totally above the law. They never get charged for anything. They're all crooks and they never get caught. It's just not true. Now, does it happen as much? Do they get charged and are they exposed as much as we'd like? No, probably not. But I'm not sure anybody gets exactly everything that they want in life. But it does happen. And there is a template to do so. Now, I'm sure talking about this, you're all thinking about Hillary Clinton and why she has been able to evade so many charges, has never spent a day in jail. In fact, we're not even sure that she's ever paid a fine for anything that she's done. And I've told you that that's not her problem. That she is a crook and crooked and has done everything that she's done with her husband and never spent a day in jail is not the fault of her. It's the fault of all the regular people whose job it is to put her in jail. And as we saw when James Comey came up and spoke in front of that committee, we just don't have people who are up to the job. That's not the politician's fault. That's not the crooked politician's fault. That's a person who has a job that's getting paid to do a job that's not doing their job. And that's different. Like I said, eventually this all comes back to us. It all comes back to the citizens of the United States and what we're willing to put up with. This is one more reason why I'm a Never Trump person. What I'm finding out is a lot of people, they may want Hillary Clinton to go to jail because she's crooked, but the crookedness of Donald Trump doesn't bother them at all. Doesn't bother them at all. In fact, they're so energetic for Donald Trump, they can't wait to vote for him. As soon as the polls open up, or for early voting in some of these states. They're all caught up in crookedness and underhandedness and being against scam artists as long as it's Hillary Clinton. But if it's Donald Trump, well, hold on a second. I just can't go along with that. So for all you people who are going to vote for Donald Trump, the reason that a lot of these crooked politicians get to continue on, and the Republicans have had their share of crooked politicians too. Just go up and look Duke Cunningham. A lot of the reason they don't go to jail is because people just are happy to put up with it. Just like you're happy to put up with Donald Trump and all of the wrong things that he's done over the years. Same thing. Now, there is another side to this. I'm sure, despite the jury finding her guilty, and I'm sure some Democrat jurors finding her guilty and deciding very quickly that she was guilty, there are probably hordes of adult Democrats in Pennsylvania who don't believe she did a thing wrong. That it was just a political witch hunt, and it's unfortunate that such a fine young woman who had such high aspirations, she was going to be senator from Pennsylvania, or she was going to be governor next, that her career has been derailed by a malicious prosecution just bent on revenge. I'm sure there's stories in Pennsylvania like that right now being written about what happened. And I know all of you who are happy to see Kathleen Kane go to jail probably know that those stories exist. Well, them being in denial about Kathleen Kane, how is that any different than you being in denial about Donald Trump? How is it any different? I would say that there is not much of a difference at all. But you know you're going to vote for him. You know you are. And you know that he is the type of guy that if he had been Pennsylvania Attorney General and got in trouble for something, that if he was a Democrat, you would want to prosecute it. But because he would be a Democrat masquerading as a Republican, you'd say, no, we got to let it go because the alternative is somebody even worse might be a Attorney General. Isn't that what you're saying when you say that you need to vote? You're telling me you need to vote, or I need to vote for Donald Trump. Do you see how twisted this all gets when you just can't say, you know what, these are all just bad people and I just need to stay away from all of them? So the question is, do you have the courage to stay away from all of them? Do you have the courage to not put your stamp of approval on Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and Kathleen Kane and the rest of them? Do you have the courage to do that? I guess we're going to find out. But I got to go. I urge you to go to my website, edwarddenzel.com, where you can find all of my old shows. You can also find my shows at Podomatic in the iTunes store. You can go to amazon.com. Just do a search for Edward Denzel there. I have some science fiction books you might find interesting with a little politics intermingled. You can go to my Twitter account. It's USA Podcast, all one word, no space in between. And I've told you I'm going to be starting this new show, and you can find the Twitter handle for that, which is called Unfound Podcast. You can do a search for that on Twitter. I'll be starting that show pretty soon, but it's been a pleasure talking to you tonight. You've been listening to America's Conservative Podcast.